It's no great secret that the role of the humble ute is fast changing. Once the domain of tradesmen, these vehicles are now finding favour with families and weekend warriors. So we've assembled 3 of the top sellers to see which fares best at work and play. We've got the new Mitsubishi Triton and Nissan Navara taking on Drive's reigning ute of the year, the Mazda Bt-50. Utes are officially the 3rd biggest new car segment in Australia, behind small passenger cars and SUVs. As a result, car makers are offering safer, more efficient products to cater to changing market tastes. Here are 3 of the most popular picks in the segment, all mid-range dual-cab utes with turbo diesel engines and automatic transmissions. We start with Drive's reigning Car of the Year champion, the Mazda Bt-50, which has largely been unchanged since its debut in 2012, but is due for an overhaul later this year. The Bt-50 is probably the most traditional of these 3 in an actual utility sense, and that's because it's got the single biggest payload of the 3, and it's also got comfortably the biggest tray in the rear, including 6 standard tie-down points. So for those that want a ute more for work rather than play, this one's pretty hard to look past. The Bt-50 offers the most interior space of these 3, but is also the most expensive, priced at a hefty $50,890 plus on-road costs. It comes fitted with a 3.2 litre 5-cylinder turbo diesel engine that produces a headlining 147 kilowatts of power and 470 newton meters of torque, and is also the cheapest to service. It's easy to see why the Bt-50, along with the matching Ford Ranger, have found favour with so many customers in Australia. For one, it's got this excellent 5-cylinder 3.2 litre turbo diesel engine. It's actually a really nice, endearing sort of diesel engine. There's none of the agricultural sort of tendencies of the other vehicles in this segment. Likewise, the matching 6-speed automatic is a really nice unit. It's probably the most intuitive of the 3 different cars here, in that it kicks down fairly efficiently, going down descents to really make use of the engine braking, but it also is quite swift in its gear change and smooth as well, which is pretty important. But in other regards, the Mazda is starting to be outshone by newer, smarter rivals. The big point highlighted by this is in its handling. It's really quite firm in the rear, and it's something that you do notice particularly on country roads. It's almost brittle in the rear, going over small undulations, and sharper ones tend to really thud through the cabin as well. But in saying that, the steering on the Bt-50 is comfortably the best here. It's got an excellent feel to it, it's direct. It weighs up adequately as well through corners while being light enough through car park manoeuvres, so that's pretty important. The Bt-50 proves the most robust vehicle on offer during Drive's load testing. Its leaf spring suspension ironing out bumps in the road. With 700 kilos on board, it flattens out the ride a lot. It feels more confident through corners than the Navara when loaded, and while it's still quite busy in the rear, it's nowhere near as jiggly or jittery as it is unladen, so a real advantage there. That said, the Bt-50 is really feeling its age inside the cabin. It has no reversing camera, and the dashboard is festooned with buttons and hard plastics. Its firm ride and price are also big detractions, issues that aren't as prevalent with Mitsubishi's updated Triton ute. The new model sports slightly revised underpinnings and a new 2.4 litre turbo diesel engine that makes 133 kilowatts and 430 newton meters. Now, much like the Navara, the Mitsubishi's had quite a lot of underbody revisions made to improve its ride and handling. Probably the biggest improvement though is actually in the interior. It's been cleaned up quite a lot, the aesthetics are a lot better, and the ergonomics are better too. It's a lot more comfortable place to be. There's soft seats, there's even reach and tilt adjustment on the steering wheel. The key thing is though that Mitsubishi have managed to do that while still retaining this car's four-wheel drive ability. It's the only one of these 3 that you can drive on high friction surfaces in all-wheel drive. Arguably the biggest selling point for the Triton to date has been its starting price, which is considerably below the mainstream ute set, both in sticker price and in the price you get at the dealership. But I'm happy to say this latest iteration has much more going for it than just its value proposition. Space-wise, it's wedged firmly between the Navara and the Bt-50 on size. Same goes for its tray size. On the road though, Mitsubishi have made huge leaps and bounds in the way that this car drives. It feels in the middle ground in terms of its bump suppression. It's not quite as soft as the Navara over little bumps in the road, but in saying that, it's nowhere near as firm as the Bt-50. There are also huge improvements in the way that it drives. The steering is much more direct than the predecessor, it's well weighted. Body control is also better restrained than before, and it makes the whole vehicle feel better resolved than what the old Triton used to. Now, the Triton may lack some of the headline numbers in terms of its power outputs, but even with 133 kilowatts and 430 newton meters, it feels really good on the road. It's a nice linear power curve, and interestingly, this car was actually the quickest of the three in our in-house 0 to 100 testing when unladen. The caveat with the Triton compared with the Bt-50 and the Navara is that there's probably a little bit more prominent lag under 2000 RPM, but once the engine spools up above 2000, it's all go. The Triton is also par for the course in its load carrying ability, even though it boasts the smallest capacities here with a 950 kilogram payload and 3.1 tonne towing capacity. With 700 kilos in the back, it actually settles the ride quite a bit over day-to-day bumps. It wanders a little bit more through corners than the Mazda, but in saying that, it's actually more confident with a load in the back than the Navara, which actually squats quite a bit in the rear and feels more jittery in its ride with the load on board. The Triton is considerably cheaper than its rivals, priced from $43,490 in GLS form. It gets a strong suite of standard equipment, plus a 5-star safety rating courtesy of 7 airbags, traction control and stability control. Finally, there's the Nissan Navara, which was also launched in Australia mid-year. Nissan has made some extensive changes to the Navara under the skin for 2015, including this new engine. It's a 2.3 litre twin-turbo 4-cylinder diesel that makes 140 kilowatts and 450 newton meters. And interestingly, it's actually the fastest of these three cars with 700 kilos in the back during our in-house 0 to 100 kilometre testing. Now, in addition to that, the Navara is the only one of these three utes to have coil springs in the rear, which is also new for 2015. The Navara sits middle of the road for price at $48,490 in ST guise. It gets the same standard equipment as the Triton, with a clean interior that lacks the size of its rivals. It also has the smallest tray. Now, those underbody revisions have brought noticeable improvements to the way the Navara rides and handles. For one, the engine, while being smaller, is much more efficient, and it is quite powerful as well. It's got a nice meaty mid-range. The other improvement on the road is the coil spring rear. It does a really good job of taking the edge out of bumps. But in saying that, the new car probably doesn't live up to all the improvements that Nissan's really spruiked. With regards to the Navara's ride and handling, it's almost as if two teams of engineers have been responsible for the front of the car and the rear of the car. And I say that because the front still feels quite firm. It's almost as if it's been made to carry loads. It's prone to sort of skipping over bumps, it thuds, and you do get a little bit of feedback through the steering wheel as well. But in comparison to the rear, it's almost at opposite ends of the spectrum, and that's because the rear is really soft, it takes the edge out of bumps, and it feels more supple over undulating sections of road. To make matters worse, it's almost as if a third team of engineers has been responsible for the steering. It's heavy at low speeds, it's unevenly weighted, and it requires quite a lot of input for not much result. So probably not as responsive as what it could be, and it's a shame because there are some real improvements with this car in the fact that it is more refined, more comfortable, more car-like, but it's not quite there. Despite boasting the best fuel economy of the bunch at 7 litres per 100 k's, the Navara used closer to 9.5 litres in real life. Its 3.5 tonne towing capacity and 986 kilogram payload were also a little underwhelming out on the road. The big downside of having the coil springs at the rear is when you actually have a load in the tray. Where the Triton and the Bt-50 are actually made more compliant by having a load in the tray, the Navara is the other way around. It feels busier over bumps, and where the extra weight should really flatten out the ride, it's sort of almost jittery over little surface imperfections, though it's still not as bad as some of the other utes in this category. The other noticeable feature with 700 kilos on board is that the Navara squats quite a bit in the rear. But having said that, it was the fastest of the three utes in the 0 to 100 km/h test. In a tight battle, it is the Bt-50 that stands out in a traditional utility sense, mostly for its load carrying ability. However, changing consumer demands mean the ute's role is being redefined. Ultimately, the verdict comes down to what you want to use each vehicle for. Each of these vehicles has their own strengths in either work, play or price, but the most rounded of the three is the Mitsubishi Triton. It might miss out on the headline numbers of its rivals, but the fact is the Triton covers most tasks well and is considerably cheapest to boot. Until updated products arrive from Toyota, Ford and Mazda later in the year, the Triton makes a compelling choice as a vehicle built for all purposes.